So they're really just trying to farm these guys for Surge, looking for different angles. This is unusual. You don't usually see a centered key, but this is obviously a fight they thought they could take. Commandment, shoot it from up top. So nicely worked. So looking for a flank to start off with, but they're not doing anything overly dangerous. Just playing for angles, playing for damage. It's a good way to get consistent Storm Surge as well, setting themselves up. This is something that a lot of players, I think, don't consider when they're looking to key a team. The best way for a team to break out when they're getting keyed, or the best way for a team to get out of a situation where they're getting keyed, is to come out the top of their builds. Is for them to essentially, like, as a trio, say, let's go for height. So Commandment here, putting some control over the top of them to make them feel like they can't go for height, is very psychologically damaging in terms of the fact, like, we don't have anywhere to go aside from horizontally, because they're on ground floor or they're in water. So two places you don't really want to be. If you're trying to break out of the situation, you feel very confined. As soon as you've got that sort of psychological thing of we're on top of you, as well as damage coming in from the sides, they've got a lot of pressure coming down on these guys. It's no wonder that they end up killing them. It's just lots of different angles. I mean, like, obvious shit, right? But straight away they've got to take pressure from Edgy. They've got to take pressure from Commandment from the top of them, and then they've got to take pressure from and now there's the classic collapse on an isolated player. So Commandment coming from up top, Centered putting pressure on Clement from the back. Even though Centered's knocked him, if Centered hadn't knocked him at this point, Commandment put enough pressure on Deceptos to essentially make him disappear. And if Centered hadn't killed him there, it would have been a 1v2, and they would have easily wiped that. I mean, we'll speed this up. They've already got them down. So they're essentially just playing. They're just playing safe at this point. They know they're going to win the fight if they play it correctly. It's just about making sure they're not throwing unnecessarily, having to reboot. So easy wipe in the end. But well set up. You see the way, again, like the psychological, not to say damage, but the psychological control you have on someone. If you've got that much control on the fight, where you've got angles with spray, and then you've got control on the top of their builds, they feel like they can't go anywhere but out. And as soon as they feel like they can't go anywhere but out, and that psychological pressure on them, they tend to make mistakes, or players tend to make mistakes. So refarming what they lost from that fight. And that's the one thing about fighting mid-game, is it is a sap on your resources. You know, like even if the fight doesn't tend to drag out too long, a lot of the time, good team can keep themselves alive for a long time. And by keeping yourself alive for a long time, you do use a lot of mats. So I think that's a good decision from Centered there, just essentially back off. They don't need to push that fight. It's a fight that they don't need to take, and look at their materials. They're not looking at that, not looking that great. They probably just want to look to loot back up, farm back up. A good team will waste 3k mats before they die. Beautiful way to put it. Like, genuinely. A good team will never die without using all of their mats. Alright, we're entering late game here. And because this game's not stacked, they didn't have to do anything special mid-game. They literally just sat in a cabin trying to bait someone through. Like, they didn't do anything special through the mid-game here. But this is one of those games where you've got to be extremely vertically aware. So straight away we're entering a pretty shitty scenario. We're going basically straight ahead here. So people on high ground are going to be, yeah, there you go. It's Aqua and Noah and Vidil. So straight away we've got to consider this verticality. So it'll be interesting to see how Centered and Edgy deal with it. They've got a pad though, so we're not too worried about that. No, we don't want to go to battle map. Straight away Centered looking to get up and break through a tarp. Nicely done. Guess to save themselves a little bit of mats, get some good surge damage if they needed it, which they didn't. That could be a really consistent way to get up hills quite nicely. And they cut over to the left, and then they look to get to front side. Pulls himself all the way in. Well done by Centered, but they're fairly low. So I think all I've learned from that is that pulling up a hill, you could fairly easily recycle a tarp, because a lot of the times you do have those big, you know, if you've got a hill that looks like that, you've got that big tunnel like that just goes up in a big ramp with the protected walls. You might be able to recycle consistently quite easily there, actually, in those sorts of scenarios. You just got to look for one that started early, and then as zone's starting to close behind you, follow it, and then break out later and start your own. You get to save a bunch of mats in the process. I'm not a huge fan of following tarps in general, but in those situations, or in that situation specifically, you can probably get away with it quite easily. So following tarp here again. Holy hell. So again, looking to follow tarps right off the start of moving zones. This team has a really interesting dynamic. So if you watch here, So Centered leads them, right? So Centered picks the lines, picks the layers initially. As soon as he's confident they're in a good spot, you watch Commandment, he starts to take over. So Commandment then starts, and Centered will be the one who starts to look for frags. It's a really interesting dynamic. There's, you know, teams have started to understand like tarpa, you know, always having a secondary tarpa in your team. But this team has a specific dynamic where Centered starts the choice, starts like the initial movements, gets them where he wants them to be. Then he says, Commandment, you take over, and Commandment does the rest. So you see now Commandment's leading them because Centered's happy with the layer that they're on and where he wants to control. As soon as he wants to change layers, he's the one who starts leading. So it's a really interesting dynamic that you don't usually see. There's usually the tarpa, and then the co-tarpa takes over when the tarpa's healing, and you go from there. These guys are totally different. Centered does every bit of leading, then Commandment takes over. So I mean, for them, it was just playing back through old builds, just making sure they controlled what they needed to. Or do they follow tarps in other games? If they're following tarps in other games, that could be an interesting trend that we could see like continue on throughout those games. That could be a consistent way to find a refresh. You've got 3 people coming through the back of the tarp and you're not one big trio. That's one thing. That's one hell of a thing to deal with if you're the guy out back looking for frags. They do this off spawn a lot. So they don't farm up metal at Misty. I'm not too sure if this probably isn't their isn't going to be their FNCS plan, but this is 100% their cash cup plan. They don't farm metal at Misty. They come to Caddy. They'll look to see if Weather and Caddy are fighting, or they'll look to see if they can get a kill on Caddy. If they can't, they then backtrack to Bridge, and they'll farm out Bridge, get their metal that way. But it's essentially loot as fast as they can at Misty, dip to Caddy, and look to either fight it or farm Bridge. And that's how they get their metal. So a lot of these lobbies today were actually quite dead, which means that, and a lot of the reason for that was because of the 6 points for the per kill. If you're getting 6 points per kill, that's a lot. That's a lot of points. So it was actually kind of worthwhile sometimes to be a little bit more aggressive. So that may be why we saw Centered and these guys pushing the Caddy team off spawn, where maybe in other more closed lobbies, you know, this is top 132. It's still some really good fighters and really good teams. Maybe in other circumstances they wouldn't in those more closed lobbies, but because kill points were worth so much, the trade-off could have actually been worthwhile. Anyway, breaking down what we've seen this entire time, it's been patience. It's been 100% just patience. They haven't done anything stupid. What we saw was a rotation to half-half where they were smart about using their materials rather than using any movement they might have had. They had a half-half that looked like that, and they realized they could take the river to save any movement they had and also to save Matt. So just basics. I mean, like everyone would know in that scenario to take a river. So moving on. So they did have a pad in the scenario, so that makes the decision to walk to half-half even better. And from here, it looks like straight away they're looking to control low because it was free at the time. One thing that I've noticed about this team this season, I'm just going to turn game sound down a little bit. One thing that I've noticed about this team this season is they've been taking low ground later than usual because there are so many teams who learned from them last season how good low ground could be if you played it properly. They learned how to play low ground properly from watching them a lot. And because of that, these guys have had to adapt and play low ground a little bit later. They've got to become the last team there. Because if you're the last team there, you're the one that controls all the space as zone really starts to close and put pressure on. So you see, now I talked about the dynamic that we had before. Centered decided he wanted to play low. Now he's done that. Commandment is leading the tarp. Now I'm not saying Centered is fully controlling exactly where Commandment's going, but he leads. He starts, gets them in the right direction, gets them where he wants to go. This is also something you're seeing a lot more recently, particularly with the prominence of chug cannons. Chug cannons are huge, and a lot more awareness of the need for white heals late game, with there being a little bit of a heal game meta. You're seeing that play a lot more, where people are fully getting themselves out into zone to control space a lot earlier, so that they already have cutoffs on teams as they're starting to come into zone. So you watch here, Commandment, really nice tarping, gets them up a layer, and then with his pepper, but you see he's literally gone 2 full boxes out into Storm to control space ahead of Tabney to try and cut him off, and Tabney's doing the exact same thing. Now, this is something that I've said for a while. Controlling space is important, and being the first one there to control space is important. People are starting to understand that, And as a result, they're starting to tank Storm ahead to do that, which is, we used to see people taking Storm back zone to try take height. We're now seeing the complete opposite. We're seeing people tanking Storm's front zone to take low. It's a really interesting dynamic that we haven't seen before. So really happy to tank Storm. And you'll generally see teams with chug cannons doing this specifically. So because they're so deep, into where zone was, they're the first to control dead side. And what you'll start to see now, which is another thing that's become more and more prominent, is them not just controlling one box, excuse me, not just controlling one box, but actually starting to control 2, 3, or 4. So for now they're still just controlling the one, but you wait to see Commandment and Neji start to take this box here as well. Maybe not for 8th zone, but for 9th final moving, absolutely. So Commandment doing a great job here. You see, his entire focus is making sure that he is the first to control space ahead of them. Really good vertical awareness. You see, he's straight away seeing that zone's pulling up, so he's looking to try and get some space. But he is the first to control space ahead of zone every single time, and it's why they are consistently able to find kills out back. We've got Centered out back. He's got 5 kills. We've got Edgy out back. He's got... Did I do that with F3? I did. We've got Edgy out back. He's only got 2, but you can see he's going to pick up quite a few more. The reason he's going to pick up quite a few more is because they control so much space, both horizontally and vertically. They've got easy edits from both sides. So for the first time, they've actually been cut off. And honestly, the only reason they survive here is because of their ping. And really nice shots as well. Ping and really nice shots. So they do come second here. But that was so beautifully controlled all through second and third moving, and that as soon as it came down to the final zones, it was just so easy. It just became Centered going out back and picking up edits on kids.